The Legend of Zelda series has created so many fantastic, memorable adventures, and each one is different and unique. That's always been one of my favorite parts about the 3D Zelda games. Each new entry presents fresh gameplay ideas and visual styles. If you were to ask someone what their favorite 3D Zelda game is, you would get a variety of different answers, each with different reasons. And to me, that's a sign of a truly great series. Each 3D Zelda game has its own strengths and weaknesses, but today we'll be focusing on the strengths of each game. More specifically, what is the one element of each game that is better than all of the rest? And in theory, if we pick the best part of each 3D Zelda game and combine them together, we should be able to create the perfect Zelda game. Now, as much as I wish I could make this video objectively, I just don't think that's possible. So remember that these are just my opinions, and I'm sure you will disagree with some of them. But instead of getting mad about it, you can share your opinion in the comments. I'm genuinely interested to see what other people think is the best element of each 3D Zelda game. But talking in depth about these games means that I'll have to get into some spoilers. So if there are any of the 3D Zelda games that you haven't played, feel free to skip over that section of the video. And as I've said multiple times already, I'm only focusing on the 3D Zelda games in this video, but maybe I'll talk about the 2D games some other time. And with all of that out of the way, now let's actually start talking about the games. I'm going to go in order of release, so that means we'll start with The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time is the first 3D Zelda game, so you would think that it wouldn't be as good as some of the later entries. But surprisingly, Nintendo managed to knock it out of the park on their first try. I still think that Ocarina of Time has some of the best music, dungeons, and story out of the whole series. But what is the best element of this game? This one was really hard to pick. Let's discuss the story first. You start your adventure as Child Link, where you have to gather the 3 spiritual stones so you can claim the Triforce before Ganondorf can. But once you lift the Master Sword, Link is transported 7 years into the future where Hyrule has been mostly destroyed by Ganondorf. Now playing as adult Link, you have to free the 7 sages and save the world. This is such a classic story, and I love the 2 different time periods. There's something very powerful about seeing the world at its best as a child and then seeing everything ruined as an adult. It gives you a real reason to want to save the world. The only thing keeping me from choosing story as the best element of Ocarina of Time is the characters. Now don't get me wrong, there are some fantastic characters in this game, but I just don't think they are as developed as some of the characters in later Zelda games. To me, it just felt like sometimes the characters in Ocarina of Time are only there to move the plot forward, and they feel less like individuals. So I don't think story is the best part of this game. Another close contender was the music. Ocarina of Time has some of the most memorable songs in the entire series. Just to name a few, there's Gerudo Valley, The Lost Woods, The Song of Storms, and Lon Lon Ranch. The music here is definitely impressive, but again, I don't know that it's the best part of the game. Personally, I prefer orchestrated soundtracks, which I know wasn't really possible at the time, but it's still what I think works best. As great as the music is, I think later Zelda games have better overall soundtracks. So that leaves the dungeons. Ocarina of Time's dungeons are incredible. From the theming to the puzzles, these are some of the very best Zelda dungeons. The first 3 are great, but the last 5 are all mind-blowing. You have the Forest Temple, Fire Temple, Water Temple, Shadow Temple, and Spirit Temple. If you've played this game, then you already know how amazing these dungeons are. Each dungeon is like the perfect combination of atmosphere, puzzle solving, and combat. Yes, I even love the Water Temple. And there are also so many great boss fights waiting for you at the end of each dungeon, like Bongo Bongo, Twin Rova, and Ganon himself. I wish I could talk in depth about each individual dungeon, but sadly we do have to move on. I think the best element of Ocarina of Time is the dungeons. Majora's Mask is a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, and it reuses a lot of the character models and animations from that game. Majora's Mask is a favorite among the Zelda community because it's unique and different from all the other 3D Zelda games. It has a 3-day time loop structure where the world ends at the end of the 3 days and you have to keep traveling back in time to try and stop it. It wasn't hard for me to pick my favorite element of this game. It's the story. I said Ocarina of Time could have had better characters. Well, guess what? That's exactly what Majora's Mask delivers. Every NPC that is reused is 10 times more fleshed out and memorable in Majora's Mask. Because of the 3-day time structure, each character has a different schedule and routine that they follow. Instead of just mindlessly standing around waiting for Link to talk to them, they run around the town completing errands and interacting with other people. I also think the story in general is the best in the series. Most Zelda games have very grand, fate of the universe type stories, but Majora's Mask tells a smaller, more personal story. The moon feels like such a real and immediate threat, and it's always looming over you. Sometimes Zelda games feel like you're just hopping from one plot point to the next, but that's not the case here. The constant time limit adds a sense of urgency to everything you do, making story moments hit a whole lot harder. And I don't know whether or not I should include side quests under the label of story, but I'm going to anyway, because Majora's Mask has the best side quests of any Zelda game. The story in this game has a sense of tragedy because no matter what you do, you can't fix everything. While you are focusing on one task in a time loop, there are so many other things happening that you wish you could fix, but there simply isn't enough time to fix everything. And that's a really rare theme to find in any Nintendo game. I think the best element of Majora's Mask is the story. The Wind Waker is a fantastic seafaring adventure that's full of charm, but when it was originally revealed, there was some backlash relating to the art style. It was a new direction for the Zelda series, and a lot of people did not like the cartoon cel-shaded look. But people have come to love this game for its story, exploration, and yes, even the art style. But what is the best part of the Wind Waker? The story is one of the many impressive elements of this game, and a big reason for that is Ganondorf. This might be my favorite version of the character. Ganondorf is calm and collected, and he always seems to be in control of the situation. One of my favorite Zelda moments is in the finale, when after losing his chance to use the Triforce, he simply laughs. But as great as Ganondorf is in this game, he can't save the story by himself. Tetra is an amazing character up until she turns into Princess Zelda and loses all of her personality. Link is much more expressive in this game, but I think that's more thanks to the art style than the story. The story also ends rather quickly, with there only being 5 dungeons in the whole game. Apparently this was due to cut content, which is a shame. So as much as I love Ganondorf, the story is not the best part of the Wind Waker. The music in this game is also pretty great, but I just don't think there's enough of it. There are some really great songs like Dragon Roost Island and The Great Sea, but I think the total number of good songs is too low. But don't get me wrong, I really love the Wind Waker's music. But there is one element that is better: the visuals. Yes, the very thing that caused controversy when it was revealed is what I think is the best part of the game. Most of the Wind Waker's identity and charm comes directly from the visuals. Like I mentioned earlier, Link shows a variety of different emotions in this game, and it's all possible thanks to the art style. Even parts of the game that I don't love that much, like the Triforce shard hunting, are made enjoyable because the visuals are just so pleasing to look at. I also love all of the character designs. The art style is just such an integral part of the Wind Waker experience, and it wouldn't be the same without it. No matter what you're doing in this game, the visuals are just beautiful. I think the best element of the Wind Waker is the visuals. Twilight Princess seems like it was a response to the Wind Waker backlash because this game has a much darker, more realistic art style, and so far it's the only mainline Zelda game to be rated T. There are so many great parts about this game, but I think the 2 best ones are the dungeons and the combat. Twilight Princess has some incredible dungeons. There's the Arbiter's Grounds, the Snow Peak Ruins, and the City in the Sky. And it also has some amazing boss fights too. From the terrifying Morpheal battle to the epic showdown with Star-Lord, these bosses always manage to impress. I went back and forth on this for a while, but as much as I love Twilight Princess's dungeons, I think the combat is better. And when it comes to which 3D Zelda game has the best dungeons, Ocarina of Time barely beats out Twilight Princess for me. But when it comes to the combat, Twilight Princess reigns supreme over all the other Zelda games. Finally, you can walk and swing your sword at the same time, and you have all sorts of different options for combat. You get to choose what sort of sword strike you want to do, and there are a bunch of hidden skills you can unlock. Underwater combat is also better here than it ever has been. Some people think the combat is too easy in this game, but I think that can be applied to any Zelda game. But I do think that Twilight Princess has the most complex and interesting combat system. The items also make combat much more interesting. The shootout in Hidden Village is so great, and it makes perfect use of the bow. And using the massive ball and chain also feels great, and it has a good feeling of weight to it. Wolf Link also has interesting combat, and it's different enough from normal Link that it adds some nice variety. Fighting enemies feels precise and fun, and the hidden skills make the combat even more interesting. I think the best element of Twilight Princess is the combat. Skyward Sword is easily the most controversial Zelda game, and that's because of one thing: the motion controls. You control Link's sword by moving and swinging the Wii Remote, and a lot of people didn't like that. And because the motion controls are all anyone talks about, I think a lot of the other parts of the game get overlooked. The story is one of the best parts of Skyward Sword. This is the best version of Zelda we have ever gotten. She and Link are childhood friends, and you can really feel the connection they have to each other, which gives you much more motivation on your quest to save her. Groose is another great character. He starts out as your average bully, but over the course of the story he slowly develops into a trustworthy friend. Really, the whole cast of characters here is great. And I love how the story explains how many of the Zelda traditions started, like the Master Sword and Ganon's reincarnation. But the story isn't perfect. The biggest issue is that you revisit a lot of the same locations multiple times, and while I thought that was executed well, the imprisoned boss fights are pretty repetitive. The story is also pretty linear, which I don't think is a problem by itself, but Fi could be pretty handholdy sometimes. She often spoils how to solve puzzles, which kind of defeats the purpose of puzzles. I love the characters and narrative of Skyward Sword's story, but Majora's Mask has a better one. The visuals of Skyward Sword are also impressive. It's a blend of the Wind Waker's cel-shaded art style with Twilight Princess's realistic one. The world has a sort of watercolor look to it that I think looks beautiful. I really do love this art style a lot, and I almost picked it as the best in the series. But I don't think it's as important to Skyward Sword's identity as the Wind Waker's art style was. Skyward Sword's visuals are not the best part of the game, but they are in a close second place. The music in Skyward Sword is fantastic, and the game wouldn't be the same without it. I mentioned earlier that I prefer orchestrated Zelda soundtracks, and this is exactly what I was talking about. In my opinion, Skyward Sword has by far the most beautiful soundtrack of any Zelda game. I mean, just listen to this. There are so many amazing songs in this game. There's the Sky and Skyloft's theme, Faron Woods, and Fi's beautiful theme. I especially love the Lanayru music because it changes depending on what time period you are in. And the Ballad of the Goddess being Zelda's lullaby in reverse is one of the coolest Easter eggs ever. Each song sets the tone perfectly for its area and makes the experience even better. I think the best element of Skyward Sword is the music. Breath of the Wild is the most recent 3D Zelda game, as well as the most groundbreaking Zelda game in years. It broke a lot of the Zelda conventions from previous games and created something entirely new. The focus was on the huge open world, but that doesn't mean that the other areas of the game are bad. The story is definitely the weakest part, because it's told mostly through memories of the past rather than present-day events. But I see why they chose this. It's so that the player doesn't feel forced to do anything that they don't want to. The music is also more different than it ever has been. They went with a more minimalistic approach to reflect the broken down world. And while the music works perfectly in this game, I do find myself missing the heroic, adventurous music from previous games. Skyward Sword definitely has better music in my opinion. The visuals are also an amazing part of Breath of the Wild. They're actually pretty similar to Skyward Sword's visuals, both cel-shaded and realistic at the same time. The visuals of Breath of the Wild's world can be stunning, but inside of shrines and divine beasts, I think it gets a little boring. They all feel very similar to each other and it gets old very fast. The combat is another great part about Breath of the Wild. It's a much more open-ended system, leading to more freedom and experimentation. But I do wish the hidden abilities made a return here, and overall I think Twilight Princess has the better combat system. You probably could have seen this coming, but I think by far the best part of Breath of the Wild is the exploration. Right from the opening moments of the game, it's made clear that the world is massive and just waiting to be explored. Playing Breath of the Wild for the first time is an experience that I'll never forget. It was so exciting and enjoyable to discover this version of Hyrule. Even years later, people are still discovering new things in this game. And while I prefer dungeons to shrines, the shrines were the perfect mini challenges to spread across the map. And the ability to climb anything gave the world an open-air feeling that you really could go anywhere and do anything. And with 900 Korok seeds scattered across the world and tons of side quests and NPCs to talk to, there's always something to do. I still go back into this game to run around Hyrule and discover things that I haven't seen before. I think the best element of Breath of the Wild is the exploration. So these are what I think are the best elements of each 3D Zelda game. So my version of the perfect Zelda game is to have the dungeons of Ocarina of Time, the story of Majora's Mask, the visuals of The Wind Waker, the combat of Twilight Princess, the music of Skyward Sword, and the exploration of Breath of the Wild. Now obviously I don't mean that you should combine these exact elements directly because that would be one mess of a game. Instead, I mean that my perfect Zelda game would have all of these elements and that they are as good as the games they came from. But all of this is just my opinion. I'm sure your favorite part of each Zelda game is different, so leave a comment sharing your opinion. And you don't have to use the elements that I chose in this video, so maybe your favorite part of Twilight Princess was the items. This video was a ton of fun to make, and I hope you enjoyed this look back at the previous 3D Zelda games. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see ya in the next one.